Good day and welcome to Professional Skills 2, Lecture 10. In today's class, we're talking about communicating across cultures. It's important that we prime ourselves to be able to communicate with people who are the same as us, but also to people who are different to us. Communication is a theme that we talk about a lot in professional skills, obviously because we do it for such a large proportion of our lives. People in South Africa, we can assume that we all communicate in the same way, but we actually don't. There's a lot of differences, just individual differences and cultural differences too. But when we take it to the rest of the world, we might notice that people from international cultures communicate in vastly different ways to us. So it's really important that you learn how to communicate with people no matter what their backgrounds are. Today we're going to look at global cultural differences, gender differences, and as well as improving cross-cultural communication. So please complete the self-assessment exercise on page 128 and ask yourself the following questions. Do you agree with the results? Are they surprising to you? And have you learned anything new about yourself? So please pause the video here, do these exercises, and continue playing the video when you are done. So effective communication is a really highly ranked goal in pretty much every situation in life. This can be very difficult when working in a homogeneous workplace. So please, if you don't know what this word means, look it up, or maybe you can even work out what it means on your own from the context. However, in South Africa, most environments are heterogeneous. What this means is, in this case, they comprise of people of different races, language backgrounds, gender, and cultural backgrounds. This isn't always the case. You will find certain workplaces that are incredibly homogeneous in South Africa. And the bottom line is that the greater the difference between the senders and the receivers of messages, the greater the communication gap can be, and we need to be aware of this. So global differences. As I'm sure you all know, English is the most widely spoken language globally. Although this is true, it's also mostly spoken as a second language, and as you know, if two second language speakers communicate with one another, it's natural to expect some kind of communication. So although everyone's speaking the same language, which might be English in this case, there are lots of differences that might be present. So think about the differences between American English and South African English and British English, Australian English. Please go and access this link in the slides and watch just the first 2 minutes of this video. Different cultures do interpret, behave, and interact differently. This is something that people working in any kind of global environment should acknowledge, and you probably will be working in a global environment in your futures. It's not appropriate to assume that other countries will work in the same way that South Africans do. And actually, it's not appropriate to assume that all South Africans will work in the same way too. So when you're working in a country outside of South Africa, it's important to try and adapt to their style. And they'll also try and accommodate you. But I think this goes for any workplace, whether it's in South Africa or outside. I like to think of same, but different. So different words might mean different things across cultures. Slang words, which is a great reason to avoid slang in the workplace, definitely mean completely different things to their traditional meaning. So something like sick or ill traditionally is not a good thing, but in slang, it is a good thing. Please is another really interesting example, and you wouldn't think that this would be controversial. But Americans are often thought of as rude because they don't say please as much as South African people. South Africans say please and sorry for everything. If you kick your foot, a South African will say sorry as if they kicked your foot for you. You know what I mean? We say please for absolutely everything and sorry for everything that we don't say please for. But to an American, if they say please to a waitress, this is actually interpreted as being rude because it makes it sound more like a command rather than a polite request. So I'll have the chicken versus I'll have the chicken, please. Like, hurry up and do it. So it's really interesting. Such a small word like please can have so many different connotations. Another good example of nonverbal communication is eye contact behavior in Zulu culture versus Western culture. Another thing is nonverbal behavior. Different cultures have different body language. So in a lot of Eastern cultures, they bow. Western cultures shake hands, and this kind of situation is something that a lot of people who travel overseas might encounter. But these days, a lot of people just touch elbows or feet, Or the double awkward, where you put out your elbow and a person really awkwardly shakes your elbow. It's happened to me. It's weird. I had to sanitize my elbow. I don't want to do it again. So nonverbal behavior comprises of a lot of different things. Facial expressions can mean different things in different cultures. So not everybody nods for yes and shakes their head for no. Eye contact is another notable difference, as are vocal differences. And this is what this video below is on Australian intonations. So please go and watch this video. An important thing when communicating across cultures is to not rely on your stereotypes. We think that we don't hold many stereotypes, when in actual fact, stereotypes are often one of the main ways that we make sense of the world. So please, in the future, for the next week specifically, become very aware of your stereotypes that you hold of other groups of people. So take a minute or two to write some of them down. And then also take a minute to write down some stereotypes that might relate to your culture, your gender, your race. And take some time to reflect on how they are incorrect and potentially harmful. So please pause the video and take some time to do that. And then also please make sure that you are aware of any stereotypes that you might use in the upcoming weeks. Stereotypes can be funny and useful, especially for ads like or companies like Nando's, where they use a lot of really funny stereotypes, because as South Africans, we do like to make fun of ourselves. Nando's gets away with it. Not everyone does, because a lot of the time they are harmful. And Nando's tends not to rely on harmful stereotypes, although there have been exceptions to this in the past. But it's really important for you to just assess your stereotypes and make sure that you question them. Why do you think this way? And is it helpful? Next is gender differences. Now, I speak for myself here, but I'm really important that I'm very upset that we're doing this online, because I love having this discussion in class. Other than 2 years ago, when I only had one male student in my class, the poor guy didn't stand a chance. The first and most important thing to note on any conversation surrounding gender is that it's far more, well, the term is far more complicated than it used to be. It's always been complicated. We are only just getting wise to it now. People are no longer broken into just male or female, and there are many, many categories in between. And from the time I'm recording this to the time that this goes out, these categories might have changed. So it's important to stay on top of this, but like I've already said, if you don't really understand somebody's gender or gender expression, ask them. Have a sit-down conversation with them about either their gender, their culture, their religion. Just take some time to actually try and understand the people that you're working with. I will say this again in a minute or two, but just take time to understand people. Ask them questions. People love talking about themselves. So ask questions and get to know them. It's important to remember that you need to be accepting and understanding if somebody has a different gender identity to the traditional male or female categories that you grew up knowing, because you will come across somebody who's got a different gender identity to just male and female. Gender does change the way that we interact with the world, and it can create communication barriers too. It's really important that you don't rely on stereotypes surrounding gender and speak to people respectfully no matter what. I think this is the bottom line for communication. Just communicate respectfully. Don't be rude to people. Don't be mean to people. Don't speak down to them. Just always be respectful no matter what. It's really difficult to separate out all the parts of people's identity. And gender is a really, really small part. It's an easy part to see, but it's not always an easy part to understand. So don't rely on gender solely. Practice speaking to people whose gender is different to yours. I know that this sounds weird, but let's go back to the Big Bang Theory. The one character from that show can't speak to women at all. And I think this is funny because he interacts with women on a daily basis. But it's not a strange situation when you think about it. Certain people are unable to speak and communicate effectively with people of the opposite gender. And maybe it's not that they can't speak to them at all, but it's just that they don't speak to them in a respectful and effective manner. So here's your homework. Please, I would like you to consider whether gender and sexuality are the same thing. Gender and sexuality. Have a think about it. So here are some guidelines to improve your communication. First of all, be descriptive rather than prescriptive. Describe rather than prescribe. What this means is that you should look back and see, how are these people communicating with each other? How are they behaving? Rather than jumping to any conclusions. So prescription is when you tell somebody how to behave. Description is when you just sit back and observe. And it's always better, especially when entering a new workplace, to be descriptive rather than prescriptive. And if you don't understand, ask. Always ask. Next is to assume difference rather than similarity. Often we will look at people and assume that they are the same as us. Culture and race are two great examples in South Africa. If you have the same color skin as somebody, that doesn't mean that your culture is going to be the same, which does work in other countries of the world, but in South Africa it most certainly does not. We might think that others are like us, even when we're vastly different. If you don't understand somebody's culture, what can you do? Ask them. Ask them in a respectful manner. Never ever judge. No culture is wrong, just different. People are really happy to talk about themselves, so ask about their culture. I always like to ask about Christmas, because in South Africa everybody celebrates Christmas. Maybe not everybody, but most people celebrate Christmas in some kind of a way. But I just assumed that people celebrated Christmas exactly like me, but pretty much nobody does. If you go and spend Christmas at your friend's house, you're going to see that their Christmas is completely different to yours. So I like around the end of the year asking people, how do you celebrate Christmas? What are your family traditions? What do you do for Christmas? Discuss the foods that you eat. And that's a good starting point to jump into other points of conversation, because Christmas is a pretty light topic here. Next is to use empathy. So always try to understand from their point of view. So aim for respectful understanding and use words that reflect that. Try to view behavior from their perspective rather than from your own. This is difficult. So try to look at how they look at their cultures rather than how you look at them. Because often behaviors are arbitrary. Arbitrary, they don't really mean too much. They don't have too much of they don't signify anything. But because they're not based in our culture, we might judge them. So for me, I use a knife and fork at the table. This is no matter what. I could be sitting on a chair, on the floor, anywhere, and I will use a knife and fork. In Asian countries, they use chopsticks. Am I going to judge them for using something different to me? No, it's different. Do I judge people who eat with a spoon? No. Do I judge people who eat with their hands? No. It's just different. It doesn't mean that these cultures are backward. Just means that it's different. So don't put value judgments on things. Just look at things as they are. And don't assume anything. Making assumptions is the beginning of trouble. So check in with people about their culture. Ask them questions. Don't make assumptions about what they do and do not do. So do the concept quiz on page 132 to make sure that you understand everything. Please pause this video and play it when you are done. So here's the behavioral checklist. Communicating across cultures requires that you, first of all, assume difference until similarity is shown. Emphasize description rather than interpretation or evaluation, so be descriptive rather than prescriptive. Interpret words, motives, and actions from the perspective of the other culture. Treat your interpretations as guesses until you can confirm them. Ask for and pay attention to feedback to make sure that your assessments are accurate, and avoid the use of all stereotypes. Please go to your textbooks and complete the application questions on page 142, and then read through and be mindful of the reinforcement exercises on the same page, and fill in the action plan on page 142, because exercises like these might be common in assessments. In the next class, we're going to look at the process of setting goals for others, and in the process, you're going to learn how to better set goals for yourselves. I want you to think about a situation where someone has imposed a goal on you. In other words, they've given you a goal. How did you feel about achieving this goal? And did you follow through with it, and why? Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you in the next class. Bye.